I almost got kidnapped but didn't realize it until years later. Reddit, what is something catastrophic that has almost happened to you? Mine was a few months after I'd turned 21. I'm from India and frequently make trips from my house in Bombay to one in another state around 1000 kilometers away. It's a 20-hour journey because I prefer buses over trains. I've been doing it for over 15 years and always book the exact same seat, 4 seats down from the driver on his side. This particular time though, I booked my ticket late and instead got a seat on the opposite side of the bus. We'd just stopped for dinner, and once done, I got back to my seat and settled down with a book. As soon as we turned back onto the highway, there was a big thud and a lot of dust and glass flying around. Turns out a truck rammed into the side of the bus. No one was hurt more than a few scratches. However, in my usual seat, there was a lady, about 5 feet tall, and there was a huge block of wood that was stuck over her head. If I'd gotten that seat, I'd have been decapitated. Was quite a WTF moment, and gave me some perspective on life. TLDR. Didn't get my usual seat on the bus. Spared a decapitation. This isn't something catastrophic that happened to me, but still interesting. I'm 16 years old, and last year when I was walking home from school, I saw 2 little kids that couldn't be older than 9 were walking home a little bit in front of me. I assumed they were brother and sister. Anyway, me being so much bigger with longer legs, I eventually started to catch up to them. And right when I was about to turn off into my street, I noticed a car pulled up next to them and asked them to get in. My heart stopped when I heard the older one say, "But mister, we don't know you." After that I kept walking towards them and screamed out, "Lucy, Mark," because I didn't know their actual names. And they both looked at me. I ran up and said, "Guys, don't run off on me like that. Stay close." Apostrophe. I pretended like I didn't see the car pulled up next to them and walked with them until the car drove off. They asked me who I was, but I just kept telling them to be quiet until the man goes away. When the guy left, I told them not to talk to strangers and walked them home. I explained to their parents what happened, and I don't think I've ever seen more grateful parents. Years ago I was walking on the sidewalk during one of those Silent Hill days that San Francisco has sometimes. The entire world filled with fog. Every sound muffled. Still on the sidewalk, I turned to cross the street and paused for absolutely no reason with my hand up in front of me and felt something tingle on my fingertips. Something flat and yellow appeared and then disappeared in front of me in a flash at hip level without making a sound. It took me about 10 seconds to realize that what I had just seen was a taxi cab, streaming by at about 50 miles per hour. That had been unable to see the road and had driven onto the sidewalk. The tingle I felt in my fingertips was my hand touching the side of the passenger's side window. TLDR, I am the luckiest motherfucker on the planet. A while back I was hit by a truck. Now, that was pretty bad, but I came away from it with just broken bones. The major breaks were my humerus, where the head snapped off, and both the tibia and fibula of my leg. Both of these breaks were nearly catastrophic. The humerus break was a centimeter away from damaging where the nerve connects in there, and my arm would have been paralyzed for life had that been a bit different in location. My tibia punctured the calf in such a way that there was severe internal bleeding. If I hadn't been brought to the ER within the fast time frame I did, it would have either caused me to bleed to death, filled and swollen the calf until the muscles popped, paralyzing them for life too. Apparently. Or both. And all of this was having jumped onto the hood so that I didn't get the full weight of the truck to my torso. Yeah. Same as you. OP. I wandered away from my mother briefly at an outdoor market and this middle-aged, heavyset guy grabbed me with no warning and tried to drag me into his van 10 feet away. I was a scrawny kid, so it almost worked. 2. Screamed my head off for help. He took off running. For years I thought that this was just something that happened to most kids. Kept me up a bit when I realized just how close I came to being kidnapped. Edit. It did not help that my mother thought I was making shit up and still seems to have no regret about that. In August of 2009 I was riding at my local motocross track one evening. I was doing laps with a friend and right on straight into a 90-foot jump. Right as hit the beginning of the jump my bike bogged and lost a lot of power. I give it some panic throttle but I'll leave the lip without enough momentum and I had to bail off the bike mid-air. I slammed to the ground after about a 20 feet fall and still moving forward pretty fast. I ended up breaking both wrists and one required surgery. A couple weeks later I go in for a pre-op blood test and I end up getting a call shortly after and they told me my blood sugar was really high and I needed to get to the doctor. So, it turns out my blood sugar was way high and I had been ignoring the only sign of my newly acquired type 2 diabetes. I was peeing a lot. If I wouldn't have broke my wrists I don't know how much longer I would have gone on without knowing. And I don't know how much higher it would have gotten and what it would end up doing to me. So that's how breaking my wrists may have really saved me. Edit. As I read over that, I realize that it starts out pretty cool with a motocross story, but then ends with lame diabetes. Sorry for that. Hahaha, that's funny. I was in a similar situation where I almost got kidnapped but didn't realize it until recently. So, here I am. White 8-year-old girl in Jamaica desperately looking to get her hair cornrowed. This was a one-day stop as part of a cruise so I'm sure we all look very touristy. Anyways. Somehow I got separated from my mom and I found a very nice man who told me he could do my hair for me. All I had to do was hop in his sketchy ass van and he would drive us both to his hair studio. Double quote. Luckily, my mom found me and whisked me away as I was getting ready to go with him. I'm an idiot. Stories like this make me want to lock my children up in a white room. With a Super Nintendo including all the games. And a slot in the door where I can stuff through Auntie Anne's pretzels and gummy worms. Mom and I were coming home from the mall when I was 10. My mom says that she thinks the car behind us is following us. She makes a series of random turns. And the guy is still behind us. She sees a cop car sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store. So she pulls into the parking lot and drives up to the cop. The man then hightails it around us and out of the parking lot, flipping us off as he passes us. I'm still curious as to why he was following us. I was driving down a country road at night. I saw a deer sign and decided to slow down significantly for the upcoming blind corner. Came around the corner going about 20 km per hour as opposed to the 80 km per hour posted limit. In the middle of the F-King road is some idiot walking and wheeling his bicycle. I stopped about 3 inches shy of hitting him. If I had been doing 80 I would have had to dig a grave. Finding out from an auntie from my dad's side that my parents were going to let my mum's sister and husband adopt me as a baby because they were childless for a long time. If the transaction happened it would have been kept a secret. Thank goodness it never happened. The woman is a nutcase and the husband ended up divorcing her after they had a son. Their kid grew up whacked and feral. And my parents became his guardian. The poor kid didn't even know how to wipe his ass and had to be spoon-fed at age 10. My parents were going to adopt my cousin's son because she was useless. They didn't. But he ended up coming to live with us at the age of 12 anyway, not knowing how to bathe, wipe his own ass, brush his teeth, or feed himself. It was 6 months before he could have a conversation or eat anything other than cold hot dogs. WTF bad parents? So I was walking back from lunch with my friend freshman year of high school. We lived in the same neighborhood so we were pretty good friends. It was a really safe place too. And awesome. Anyway, we're walking home and there's this old lady standing at the end of her alley. Old people do what they want. So we don't think anything of it as we head her way. Once we get near her, she asks us a favor. Can you two boys help me move some plants into my basement? Double quote. 2 things went through my mind. 1. Plants don't belong in basements. Not a lot of light and such. 2. I might end up like those plants, stuck in the basement without much light if I help her. So here I am, stuck in my basement without much light. But it's on my terms now. I was 4-wheeling with some friends up in the Rocky Mountains last summer. I'm not from the US and this was my first time, so I was just a passenger. Everything was going normal. At least as normal as I think, yelling "Yahoo" while listening to the Team America soundtrack. When we took a turn a little too sharp and high centered on the edge of a cliff. It was like slow motion as we slowly crept toward the edge and I decided to put on my seatbelt. The car got stuck on a mound but wouldn't move backwards. I think the mound was the only thing that slowed us down enough not to go off the cliff. We were literally an inch away from plummeting to our doom. While America FCKO was blasting through the speakers. We don't let Corey drive anymore. I hope you see this, Corey. You are an awful driver. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV in the basement with my dad while my mom was out with her friends. We heard the door open upstairs and someone walking around. My dad told me to go upstairs and say hi to my mom. And being lazy, I refused. A few hours later my mom did come home and she asked my dad if he had moved some of the stuff in our house. Because it was missing. We had been robbed. If I hadn't been so lazy, I would have gone upstairs and that guy might have taken me too. He also might have seen that someone was home and fled. But the other option is really scary to think about. When I was very young, probably 1-2, my biological father hired someone to kill my mother and I so that he could leave the country. We lived in Europe. And you couldn't just leave without your wife, kids. And he didn't want to pay alimony. Fortunately, my biological father lied to the guy to convince him to do it and said that my mother was awful and that I was a brat. The would-be murderer saw us in a park and decided to warn my mother at a party he knew they'd both be at later on. Edit. A few clarifications. I was not in a drunk stupor as a child. My biological father was. This was not recent. It happened between 1989 and 1991 in a country that was still technically a part of the USSR. My mother told me this story. And I verified it with relatives independently. If we're all going to be skeptics, then I guess I can never be sure if it happened. And I can't trust anyone. But if I have to go through life thinking that and thinking my mother lied to me for no reason at all, then I'd rather believe a lie. When I was around 9 I went roller skating with my older friends who were around 12 years old. We had just skated out of our neighborhood area when I realized that I forgot something. So I skated home, which was literally 2 minutes away. Got whatever and headed back. I find out that my two friends had crossed a small road while I was gone and had gotten hit by a driver who ran the red light. It was a hit and run. It was especially sad because one was a long-time ballet dancer and she was never able to recover from it. Sort of similar situation. When I was in kindergarten, a man I didn't recognize came to walk me home. Being as stupid as I was, I grabbed my bags and went with him. I'm not sure how, but he even knew my name, I think. We chatted and he walked me home. And as I walked through the doors my parents ran to me. Turns out they were looking for me everywhere, thinking I had been kidnapped. My teacher had told them that I left with a man claiming to be a relative. To this day, nobody knows who the man was that walked me home. Edit. Just to clarify, he did not actually know the location of my house, I think, as I clearly remember leading the way. Also, he was quite an older man, as his beard was completely white. It was you. From the future. You see. You were kidnapped that day. Kidnapped and sold into slavery. But you from the future managed to get your hands on a time machine. So you went back in time and walked you home to keep yourself from being abducted. Aren't you glad you? So it will be lost in the shuffle, but that's okay. I signed up to post this. Heck yeah. So my best friend when I was in 5th grade and he was in 6th grade was brutally murdered. We used to walk home from school together. He was a boy, I a girl, and I would usually go into his house for a bit just to hang out and eat Doritos. My mom never bought Doritos, so this was a big deal. However, for some reason this day I just decide to go home. No clue why. Later, around 3 hours later, I hear all sorts of sirens and stuff. And I run outside to see what is going on. I see that it is at Slade's house and start freaking out. He was my best friend. His parents are going insane. Turns out someone was robbing his house when he walked in. He promised he wouldn't tell. The robber murderer was a 16-year-old in our neighborhood who left. Then came back and tied him to a chair and brutally murdered him. Had I gone inside, I would have been murdered too. Nothing like being in 5th grade and knowing your best friend was murdered and you almost were too. I still miss that kid and I'm 26. I recently looked up the murderer's name. And he is on some prisoner website looking for pen pals. I wish someone had shanked him. Gosh. Back in the day I started working when I was 15 at a little pizza joint and finally saved up enough money around 18 to buy a set of wheels. No more rides from mom or friends. I was finally getting a little facial hair. And now I could buy my own ride. I was starting to feel like a grown up at last. I ended up getting a real clunker but I was proud of it. And I daydreamed about swooning the ladies as I drove off the lot with it. On the very first night I had it. As luck would have it, it stalled out over some train tracks. Luckily I got it going again and spent a couple of days with my dad fixing it up. Anyway, one day I was driving and saw a kid rollerblading so I pulled over to see if he wanted my old skateboard. I didn't really need it anymore, I figured. And I was trying to save this kid's dignity because once he got a little older he'd realize rollerblading would never be cool. Well, he flat out refuses a free skateboard for whatever reason, and then I see what I guess is his family walking up. And his dad looked pretty intimidating. I freaked out, thinking they might assume I'm trying to sell him drugs or kidnap him or something, so I just threw the skateboard in the back of my truck and got out of there before I became a registered sex offender or some crazy shit. TLDR. Possibly avoided becoming a sex offender. In the 70 feet my mother and her girl friend were hitchhiking in Yugoslavia. They are also from Croatia, then part of Yugoslavia. They were CCA 18-19 and knew quite a bit of English, which was unusual at the time. A truck stopped and they decided to pretend they are English girls. Rednecks at the truck presumed they did not know Croatian, so they started making plans for kidnapping them, taking them to Albania, and selling them into slavery. On the first gas stop, they found out how much can they run. When my partner was pregnant with our second child, she began bleeding very heavily within about 3 weeks. There is a history of miscarriage, so we barreled up to the hospital, and they did a scan. Sonographer wrote no fetal heartbeat. IMSI on the paperwork. The doctor took one look and said you can either get cleaned out or let it happen naturally. Being a little distraught, we decided to think about it. 1 week later, she was still showing as pregnant on the little pea sticks. So we had another ultrasound. There was a heartbeat. Apparently, it's assault to tell a sonographer he's incompetent. When I lived in Philadelphia, a friend and I were walking through the shitty part of town we lived in. These really young kids, 11 or 12, asked me for $1, to which I said absolutely not and kept walking. One of the kids punched me in the back, and I turned around to look at him with a "what the hell are you doing?" look, and he punched me in the side and stomach about 3 more times. I just stared at him until they ran off. When I got inside and took my coat off, it was winter. Thick down North Face coat, and all these feathers started coming out of the holes in the coat. I realized he was stabbing me, but whatever he was using, we guessed short sharpened screwdriver, wasn't going all the way through the coat and didn't hit my skin. I almost got mugged at gunpoint but was too drunk to understand the situation and just walked past them. My friend was unfortunately sober. Edit for more info. My friend gave the guys his wallet. My friend was collecting keg money all night, but luckily hadn't put any of it in his wallet, while the party goers, who were inside the house looking at us from the street, debated either calling the cops, jumping the muggers, or calling the cops and jump the muggers. They decided to just call the cops. When the cops showed up, they berated us for having a party and said my friend was asking to get mugged and it was his own fault. TLDR. Friend lost his wallet with minimal money. The cops were unhelpful dicks. Whoa. This is going to get buried. But I've been waiting for a time to share it. When I was 7 years old, I was at a Christian crusade, Jimmy Swaggart, I believe, in Los Angeles. At a professional basketball arena. My dad got tired of me squirming through the 4-5 hours event and left me to go play on the concourse. Thinking, hey, it's a Christian event. What could happen? Within 10 minutes, I was abducted and sexually assaulted by a security guard and was able to get away before anything really bad happened. I mean, that was pretty traumatic enough as it is. But it could have been so much worse if I hadn't been able to escape when and how I did. I was waiting for the streetcar at a seedy intersection in Toronto with my girlfriend after we had gone for dinner. A guy approaches us and in a couple sentences conveys the following. 1. He needs money. 2. He is recently out of jail. 3. He has a taser. He showed us the holster. We had a few beers in us. And this guy was careful not to do anything obviously threatening. So I just gave him the same treatment I do to any panhandler. He gave an excuse like I need to take the Greyhound. As soon as he mentions Greyhound, my girlfriend launches into this extremely long and inconsequential anecdote about this one time she took the bus somewhere. She must have cut him off. Because he never made his intentions clear. And eventually just wandered off and left us alone. TLDR, girlfriend tells boring story. Averts mugging. When I was 13 I was surfing in Hawaii. And my brother's surfboard hit my midsection. I got back to the beach. And couldn't walk. My dad was trying to get me to walk back to the hotel. But another girl had dislocated her shoulder. And the ambulance was already there. They checked me out. And it turned out I had a ruptured spleen. It had to be surgically removed. And I spent a week in the hospital, overlooking a Hawaiian graveyard no less. The DRs told me I would have died if I hadn't immediately gone to the hospital. One time my mother, my sister and I were coming home from the video store, you know. Back when that was a thing that existed. My sister and I were running around like kids do. We got a fair distance ahead of our mother. So we were on the corner across the street from home. And our mother was up about a block or so back. So a car passing stops at the light. And I think it's odd because the light is green. I'm pretty young. But I already feel like something's weird. Then the driver opens the door and starts stepping out. I'm a little freaked. But I don't know what to do. Before he gets out I just shout hey MOOOM, comma. And as soon as he hears that he freezes. Gets back in the car and drives away. I never mentioned it to anyone, dunno why. I wonder if my sister remembers this. Probably not as terrible as most of the stories here. But I was almost raped by my ex-boyfriend. Somewhere around 6 months after we broke up. I was in town and contacted him in hopes we could be friends. Stupid. I know. He agreed. And I went over to his new place. While the first 15 minutes of the visit went fine, it soon progressed to him showing me his stash of condoms and telling me that I ruined him for every other girl. Soon he had me pinned down on his bed while I insisted that I wanted to go home. Thankfully he suddenly realized what he was doing. Let me go. And I got the FCK out of there. When I was 10 I was almost shot in my sleep by my mother's ex-boyfriend. Instead he just shot her in the head, killing her, and left me alone. He left, returned to his apartment and called the police and confessed before taking his own life. The police found me still asleep and brought me to a neighbor's until my stepfather could be found to tell me my mother had been murdered. Not sure if this counts, as even though I escaped being murdered, something pretty catastrophic still happened. My brother and I were at our neighbors fishing in their pond. Their grandpa was a truck driver and had the cab of his truck parked in the front yard, without the trailer on it. I was at the pond with my neighbor and her mom, and my brother was riding his bike in the yard. The grandpa got in his truck and started to leave. All of a sudden my friend's mom starts running and screaming with her hands waving wildly in the air towards the grandpa's truck, screaming at him to stop. Apparently, my brother was riding his bike in front of the truck and it was so high the grandpa couldn't see him below. He started going and it knocked my brother off the bike and he went under the truck. He stopped right in time. My brother got knocked on his head from something under the truck and had tire marks on him, but he wasn't hurt. He could have died that day. So crazy. The grandpa stopped driving trucks after that happened. BC, he felt so bad. I was kidnapped as a kid when I was 3 or 4. My mom and older brother and I were at a swap meet. My mom was going from vendor to vendor getting what she needed while she asked my brother to follow along holding my hand while I happily ate ice cream. For some reason, my brother stopped paying attention to me and let go of my hand. He must have been 10 or 11. When my mother turned to ask for me, he said he didn't know where I was. She began to panic as she looked for me. Eventually, another vendor who saw the whole thing tipped her off. 2 people had bundled me up in a carpet and started carrying me away. Fortunately, my mother found and caught up with them and got me back. This is the story I tell people when they want to hear something interesting about me. I was about 7-8 and playing hide and seek with my friends. When it was my turn to hide, I ran into one of their houses. We all lived in one tight neighborhood, looking for a spot. I ran into this girl, who was also playing with us at the time, then 40's father. He asked why I was on their yard, then offered to hide me by pressing me against the wall and starting to grind on me. I didn't know what the hell he was trying to do then, but it felt weird, so I pushed him away and ran. I continued playing and never thought of it again. Not until years later I realized how lucky I was to be able to run away from that. Never told anyone, including the daughter, since. When I was 9, my family and I were in Yellowstone and went on a hike that passed by Mystic Falls. Near the cliff, we stopped for some water. Somehow we ended up getting into a water fight, splashing water at each other out of our water bottles. I jumped back to avoid some water, slipped, and started to slide down the side of the cliff, my legs hanging over a 70-foot drop. I started having a vivid flash to what it would look like as I fell down. And my family was just staring at me, shocked. My mom finally snapped out of it and pulled me up. Later on, we got to the bottom of the waterfall through that trail. I started jumping from rock to rock along the water where my brains were very nearly almost splattered upon. I was walking down a dark narrow street, not technically an alley, that I'd always thought was safe enough. It was near my ex's house and I was heading back to my car to go home. 3 wild drug users appear. They produce shivs and demand my wallet and car keys. They're pretty obviously tweaking on something. Shivers. Jittery eyes. All of the clues. I pull out my own knife from my pocket and flip it open. It's considerably stronger and longer than their sharp microwave turntables. I don't say anything. I just hunch my shoulders and give them a dead stare. And they just look at each other and walk away. I have no idea if I was prepared to defend myself with potentially lethal force. I just am thankful it never came to anything. TLDR, staved off a mugging with intimidation. Got lucky.